The man desired to marry his biological daughter and forcibly took her as his wife. The girl couldn't endure this monstrous existence any longer and fled from her father's grasp while he slept. As she grew older, to save her life, she had to cut off her tongue. Even professional surgeons dared not perform the act. With no other choice, she took a blade and severed her own tongue. One must admit, her resolve was terrifyingly absolute. The father shamelessly spied on his daughter while she undressed, an act fortunately intercepted by his horrified wife. His wife screamed that this was his own flesh and blood, but the man showed no remorse. He struck her with a resounding slap across the face, then retrieved a whip to lash her mercilessly. Their daughter Liz accidentally witnessed this brutality. Young Liz watched her father, the same man who preached morality in church, transform into a snarling beast attacking her mother, flooding her with confusion and primal fear. That night, Liz sprinted to the outhouse with crippling stomach cramps, only to discover blood staining her undergarments. Her trembling hands confirmed the bleeding, ignorant of menstruation. She believed herself dying. Hearing movement outside, Liz blew out her candle and peered through the door crack. She saw her mother trailing her father into the rainy darkness. Despite the storm, Liz followed and witnessed him flogging her mother while invoking divine authority. Powerless to intervene, the child endured her mother's screams like daggers piercing her soul. That night, the broken mother crawled into Liz's bed, clutching her daughter while silent tears fell. At dawn, Liz scrubbed her bloodied nightdress raw at the wash basin. Her mother approached gently, explaining menstruation as nature's gift of womanhood, a revelation the girl absorbed through lingering terror. All this unfolded under the father's predatory gaze. When Liz questioned why they suffered this tyranny, her mother parroted generations of oppression. "This is women's destiny." Liz rejected the answer, branding it grotesque injustice. The father barged in then, demanding his wife leave for a private discussion with Liz. He declared her womanhood required feeding the hogs a twisted rite of passage. While tending pigs that afternoon, Liz encountered a battle-worn knight caked in mud and blood. The exhausted warrior begged for water, collapsing after drinking from Liz's offered ladle. She dragged him into the pigsty and extracted a bullet from his thigh, an act met with tearful gratitude before he lost consciousness. Meanwhile, the mother noticed her husband's lecherous stare at Liz through the window. Liz was tending to the injured knight when her father suddenly stormed into the pig pen, prompting her daughter to frantically gesture for the knight to stay silent. He shamelessly demanded his daughter scrub his back while seizing the chance to lecture Liz about women's duties, bitterly complaining that her mother had failed as a wife. After enduring years of her husband's violence, the wife had long abandoned sharing a bed with him. That night, despite years of abuse-driven separation, she approached his bed to shield her daughter. He rebuffed her, then beat her savagely when she accused him of lusting after Liz, each blow eroding her last shreds of dignity. During Liz's baptism, the hollow-eyed mother silently walked away, her daughter's final glimpse of living warmth. The father sermonized about virtue in church while his wife hanged herself before the altar. Liz watched him blame divine will for the suicide, his indifference colder than the grave. At home, the father performed self-flagellation with his whip, a hollow spectacle of repentance Liz saw through. During a midnight storm, she found the recovering knight. He embraced her as she recounted her trauma, their connection deepening through shared whispers and ragged breaths. Emboldened by his wife's death, the father escalated his madness. At dawn, he dragged Liz to church, claiming divine sanction to marry her. When she fought like a caged animal, he produced his dead wife's muzzle to silence her. The knight burst in, demanding the muzzle's key and hurling it to Liz once obtained. The father seized the knight's gun, shooting him point blank before recapturing Liz. Discovering her affection for the knight, he whipped her bloody, but Liz's defiance burned brighter with every lash. That night, she fled barefoot in her nightshift through whipping winds. She ran until her lungs screamed and legs buckled, collapsing in freedom's first embrace. When she awoke, she found herself lying in a horse-drawn carriage, her heart filled with confusion and dread. Yet she didn't know that escaping her father's tyranny would thrust her into an even harsher reality. She encountered a man who observed her intently, his eyes glinting with greed as he plotted to sell her to a tavern owner for profit. Liz couldn't understand their language and had no idea where she would end up. When taken to the tavern, she saw flashily dressed women and heard foreign tongues she couldn't comprehend. She tried searching for the man who brought her, but the tavern owner intercepted her. The owner assigned her menial tasks due to her youth, though danger constantly loomed in that chaotic environment. One day, a drunken patron developed lecherous intentions toward her. In the critical moment, a female co-worker intervened, offering herself to the drunk instead, but the man insisted Liz must stay and watch. Though reluctant, the co-worker complied under the owner's silent approval. After his drunken revelry, The man tried forcing Liz's head down. The co-worker panicked and shot him dead. The incident caused an uproar. Tavern rules strictly forbade harming customers, and the dead man was the owner's brother's relative. To preserve the tavern's reputation, the owner made an example of the co-worker. Liz watched her friend executed. Consumed by grief and despair, 5 years passed. Liz adapted to tavern life, forming an inseparable bond with Elizabeth. They often fantasized about escaping their cage and finding freedom elsewhere. One night, screams erupted upstairs. Elizabeth had bitten off a customer's tongue in panic. The furious owner demanded punishment. Liz frantically pleaded, fearing for Elizabeth's fate. When the injured customer demanded Elizabeth's tongue be cut out, she screamed wildly but couldn't stop the blade. Liz watched helplessly, her heart shredded as Elizabeth's cries turned to whimpers. She nursed Elizabeth through recovery, cleansing wounds with alcohol and teaching her sign language using a deaf-mute dictionary. Just as they adjusted to this new communication, Elizabeth mentioned leaving to find a spouse, crushing Liz's heart. At the matchmaker's office, the owner assumed Elizabeth had chosen well, but the suitor hesitated to marry a mute woman, despite the man living far away and demanding she cook and care for his children. Elizabeth agreed without hesitation. When the suitor's letter and photo arrived, Elizabeth wept. Liz secretly funded her journey, deepening her own sorrow. That evening, word spread of a wealthy patron renting the entire tavern. Though Elizabeth's departure loomed, the owner insisted she work her final shift, a rare lucrative opportunity in slow season. Downstairs, as the owner negotiated with the patron, Liz glimpsed the man, her monstrous father. Unseen for 5 years, she trembled violently, struggling to breathe. Blindfolded, Liz descended the stairs, but her father recognized her through her trembling posture. He touched the birthmark on her neck, confirming she was the daughter he'd hunted for half a decade. Ripping off her blindfold, he loomed over her as Liz teetered on the edge of collapse. Liz's defiance seemed to enrage her father, who revealed a ferocious snarl and pulled out his belt to whip her wildly. Each lash was accompanied by Liz's screams and trembling as she cried out for help, praying someone would save her. Elizabeth rushed over without hesitation upon hearing the cries, her gaze locking onto the beast-like man before grabbing a knife and slashing at him in fury. Yet the man's face only suffered a shallow wound, and the enraged father instead stabbed Elizabeth with the same knife. Elizabeth, who should have been chasing happiness tomorrow, lost her life right there. The father lunged to seize Liz, but she cleverly shoved him to the ground, swiftly yanking the knife from Elizabeth's body and plunging it mercilessly into his throat. Watching her father collapse in a pool of blood, Liz felt shock but knew she had to stay composed. She pressed the knife into her father's hand, then swapped clothes with Elizabeth. To fake her own death, she set Elizabeth's body ablaze with fire. After fleeing the scene, Liz resolved to start anew under Elizabeth's identity. To fully assume Elizabeth's life, she had to cut out her own tongue. She sought the doctor who once treated Elizabeth, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. So Liz steeled herself and sliced off her tongue with her own hands. Though the agony was unbearable, she persisted for freedom and her new family. She then boarded a carriage, clutching a photo as she stared at the unfamiliar faces of a man and child. Inhaling deeply to begin her new life, she would use Elizabeth's name to pursue the happiness and freedom she'd never known. With this man, she built a home, bore a sweet daughter, and lived a peaceful farming life away from the world's chaos. Yet fate proved relentlessly cruel. One day, while attending church with her daughter, Liz heard a chillingly familiar voice. The tranquil atmosphere shattered as that monstrous, familiar tone echoed through the pews. She turned in disbelief to see her beastly father standing there, miraculously alive. Liz's heart raced as she fought to hide her terror, fearing her husband might notice. Just then, a pregnant woman urgently needed midwifery, and Liz's skilled midwife had no choice but to step forward. She asked others to leave so she could focus, but when she looked up, her father's vicious glare met hers. Liz knew she had to stay calm and prioritize saving the woman. As time passed, the situation worsened. The baby's head was too large for natural birth. Liz decisively gestured to her daughter that a choice must be made between mother and child. Though young, the girl understood and quietly pulled her grandmother aside. Resolved, Liz sent her daughter out and poured all her effort into saving the mother. After a grueling struggle, Liz saved the woman's life, but the infant did not survive. The family wept in devastation, and Liz herself felt the weight of sorrow. But greater danger loomed. That night, a gunshot tore through the silent darkness as Liz's family slept. Startled awake, Liz cowered in a corner, horrified to find the bullet had nearly struck her. The shooter was the grieving husband of the woman she'd delivered. Blaming Liz for his child's death, he vowed to make her pay with her life. As the man raged, Liz's husband tried reasoning with him, but the distraught father demanded blood for blood. Suddenly, the beast-like father reappeared, hypocritically playing the Holy Father to rescue Liz and dismiss the man. Grateful, Liz's husband invited the Holy Father inside. Unaware, Liz lurked fearfully in the shadows. This wolf in sheep's clothing always masqueraded as a pious priest before others. When Liz's husband stepped away, the fiend dropped his mask, threatening to punish Liz and harm her daughter if she disobeyed. Terror and despair gripped Liz, but she knew she must act to protect her family. She resolved to flee the dangerous town with her husband. Liz's husband loved her with unwavering devotion, though clueless about the looming storm. He asked no questions and pledged full support for her decision. At dawn, the sun went to feed the sheep, but froze in horror. All pregnant ewes and unborn lambs lay dead. They instantly recognized this as the man's revenge, fueled by rage and grief. They grabbed their rifles and marched out to confront him. Liz covered her daughter's eyes with cloth to shield her from the carnage while she disposed of the slaughtered sheep. As she worked, the barn door suddenly slammed shut. She pushed desperately but couldn't open it. Her father's shadow then loomed over her granddaughter, and he quietly abducted the girl. Liz's heart plummeted. She climbed a high vantage point to search for her daughter but slipped, fell, and lost consciousness. When her husband and son returned, Liz awoke. Her husband said the man had fled, but she frantically gestured about her father's crime before rushing off to find her daughter. Miraculously, the girl soon returned unharmed, lifting the weight from Liz's heart. That night, Liz questioned her daughter about her conversation with the grandfather. Seeking clues, the daughter revealed the man had called Liz evil, accused her of murder, and vowed to take her away. Realizing her father's malice, Liz resolved to eliminate the threat. She sneaked to his cabin at night only to find an empty bed with her daughter's doll lying there. Her stomach dropped as she grasped the trap. Her father had already crept to her daughter's bedside, knife glinting in his hand. Meanwhile, Liz's husband awoke and searched for her. Spotting light in the barn, he grabbed his gun, but the killer ambushed him from behind. When Liz returned, her heart shattered. Her husband lay dying under the man's torture, begging for mercy and urging her to flee with the children. Their son, tears streaming but resolute, fulfilled his father's final wish with the rifle. As they fled, their home erupted in flames behind them. They began the journey to her father-in-law's house. Hearts heavy with terror and grief, they trekked through night into day, sunshine into blizzards. The killer's haunting song echoed around them, foretelling greater danger. Liz hid behind a tree, ready to strike, but only a lone horse galloped past. Later, they stumbled upon a dead goat. Panicking, Liz dropped her gun. Her son stopped the wagon, only to be shot mid-step. A silent tragedy unfolded as the boy collapsed. Her son still whispered concern for his sister before another bullet stole his life. Liz watched her family die, her soul tearing apart. At nightfall, they reached her father-in-law's home. The old man crumbled at the news, his dream of reunion now ashes. Liz gripped her rifle, eyes blazing with resolve. She signaled him to protect her daughter. Knowing the killer would return, she guarded the door all night, awaiting the monster. Rushing inside later, she found her daughter safe but her father-in-law murdered in his chair. She scooped up her daughter, packed essentials, and tried escaping through a window, but the killer yanked her back. He overpowered her and lunged for the child. Maternal fury ignited. Liz bit through her ropes, hurled an oil lamp at the man, and fired a final shot to ensure his death. Free at last, Liz took over her father-in-law's lumberyard to rebuild. But fate wasn't done. A sheriff arrived with a wanted poster for her friend Elizabeth, who'd killed a bartender before helping Liz. With no photos of Elizabeth, Liz now bore her crimes. Cornered, Liz chose to end her suffering in life with quiet finality. Liz's defiance against fate, her unyielding spirit to challenge injustice, will forever inspire those fighting for freedom, equality, and justice. I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.